The morning mist hung low over Buckingham Palace as Queen Elizabeth sat in her private study, reviewing the day's schedule. At 96, she had witnessed countless family dramas, political upheavals, and personal tragedies, but nothing had prepared her for the growing tension between her daughter-in-law Camilla and her granddaughter-in-law Catherine. The Queen's fingers trembled slightly as she held her morning tea, a sign of her advancing age that she tried desperately to hide from the public eye. Today marked the 10th anniversary of a charity close to her heart, one that supported military families who had lost loved ones in service. It was meant to be a celebration, a moment of unity for the royal family as they honored those who had sacrificed everything for their country. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had been particularly passionate about this cause since marrying William. Her genuine warmth and ability to connect with grieving families had impressed the Queen beyond measure. The young woman possessed a natural grace that reminded Elizabeth of her own early days as a royal, when duty and compassion walked hand in hand. However, Camilla, the Queen consort, had been struggling to find her place within the family's charitable endeavors. Despite her years of dedication to various causes, she often felt overshadowed by Catherine's natural charisma and the public's obvious preference for the younger royal. The media's constant comparisons between the two women had created an invisible wall between them, one that seemed to grow higher with each passing month. The Queen had noticed the subtle signs of discord during recent family gatherings. Camilla's forced smiles when Catherine received praise, Catherine's careful politeness that lacked genuine warmth when addressing her stepmother-in-law, and the way both women seemed to navigate around each other like ships passing in the night. As Elizabeth prepared for the day's events, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to unfold. Her lady-in-waiting Margaret had mentioned whispered conversations between staff members about tension behind closed doors. The palace workers, who had served the family for decades, possessed an uncanny ability to sense when storms were brewing within the royal household. The charity event was scheduled to begin at 11 in the morning, with both Catherine and Camilla expected to give speeches about the importance of supporting military families. The Queen had specifically requested their joint participation, hoping that shared purpose might bridge the growing gap between them. Catherine arrived early, as was her custom, wearing a navy blue dress that struck the perfect balance between elegance and respect for the solemn occasion. She spent time reviewing her notes, ensuring that every word would honor the memory of the fallen soldiers and provide comfort to their surviving family members. Her dedication to preparation had always impressed the Queen, who saw in Catherine the qualities of a future monarch. When Camilla arrived, precisely on time as protocol demanded, the atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. She wore a similar shade of blue, though her dress featured more formal detailing that emphasized her status as Queen consort. The unintentional coordination of their outfits would later be noted by fashion reporters. Though neither woman seemed pleased by the similarity, the Queen observed their interactions carefully as they gathered in the green drawing room before the event. Catherine curtsied respectfully to Camilla, who nodded in acknowledgement, but the exchange lacked the warmth that once characterized their relationship. Both women maintained perfect composure, their years of royal training evident in every gesture and expression. As they prepared to move to the venue, the Queen noticed how Catherine's usual confidence seemed slightly strained. The young princess kept glancing at her notes, unusual behavior for someone who typically spoke from the heart with remarkable ease. Camilla, meanwhile, appeared more rigid than usual, her shoulders held with military precision that suggested she was bracing herself for something unpleasant. The event venue had been transformed into a memorial garden, with photographs of fallen soldiers displayed alongside letters from their families. The sight was both beautiful and heartbreaking, a fitting tribute to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. As guests began to arrive, including military officials, bereaved families, and charity representatives, the weight of the occasion settled over everyone present. The Queen took her place at the front of the gathering, flanked by Catherine and Camilla. The irony was not lost on her that these three women, representing 3 generations of royal service, were struggling to maintain unity at an event dedicated to honoring sacrifice and loyalty. As the ceremony began with a moment of silence for the fallen, Elizabeth found herself praying not only for the souls of the departed soldiers, but also for the healing of the wounds within her own family. She had spent her entire reign trying to balance personal relationships with public duty, and the challenge seemed no easier in her twilight years. The first speaker, a military chaplain, delivered a moving address about the courage of those who serve. His words resonated through the assembled crowd, many of whom dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The Queen noticed how both Catherine and Camilla seemed genuinely moved by the tribute, their shared emotions momentarily bridging the gulf between them. However, as they prepared for the speeches that would define the rest of the event, the Queen sensed an undercurrent of tension that threatened to disrupt the solemnity of the occasion. She had witnessed enough family conflicts over the decades to recognize the signs of an impending confrontation. Even when hidden beneath layers of royal protocol and public scrutiny, the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the memorial garden. As Catherine rose to deliver her speech, the Queen held her breath, uncertain whether the day would end in harmony or heartbreak. The weight of family legacy, personal relationships, and public expectations hung in the air like morning mist, waiting to either dissipate with the warmth of understanding or condense into the cold droplets of discord that could freeze even the warmest heart. Catherine stepped forward to the podium with the grace that had become her signature, but those who knew her well could detect the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted the microphone. The assembled crowd of military families, charity workers, and dignitaries waited expectantly, their faces reflecting both grief for their losses and hope for continued support. Today we gather not just to remember those who gave their lives in service to our nation, Catherine began, her voice clear and strong despite her inner turmoil, but to celebrate the unbreakable bonds of love that survive even death itself. Her words carried the weight of genuine emotion, drawn from her personal interactions with countless military families over the years. The Queen watched proudly as Catherine spoke about her visits to military bases, her conversations with young soldiers' mothers, and her work with children who had lost parents in service. Each story was delivered with such authenticity that several audience members were visibly moved to tears. This was Catherine at her finest, connecting human heart to human heart without pretense or artifice. However, as Catherine continued her speech, she began to venture into territory that would prove problematic. In her passion to honor the families present, she started describing a new initiative she had been developing privately, a comprehensive support program for military widows and children that would revolutionize how the royal family approached veteran affairs. "I envision a future where no military family feels forgotten," Catherine declared, her voice growing stronger with conviction, "where our support extends beyond ceremonial occasions to practical, daily assistance that helps rebuild lives shattered by loss." The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause, clearly moved by her vision and dedication. But as Catherine outlined her detailed plans for counseling services, educational scholarships, and housing assistance, the Queen noticed Camilla's expression growing increasingly strained. The Queen Consort had been working on similar initiatives for months, consulting with experts and developing proposals that she had planned to announce at this very event. Catherine, unknowingly, was presenting ideas that directly overlapped with Camilla's carefully prepared work. The irony was devastating. Both women had been driven by genuine compassion to develop programs that would help the same vulnerable population. But their lack of communication had created a situation where one would inevitably overshadow the other. The Queen realized with growing alarm that this was not a case of malicious competition, but rather a tragic misunderstanding born from the emotional distance that had grown between them. As Catherine concluded her speech to thunderous applause, she returned to her seat with a satisfied smile, believing she had honored both the fallen soldiers and the vision for future support. She had no idea that her words had just delivered an unintentional but crushing blow to Camilla, who now faced the impossible choice of either appearing to copy Catherine's ideas or abandoning months of careful planning. The Queen watched Camilla's face carefully, seeing the precise moment when determination replaced devastation in her daughter-in-law's expression. Years of dealing with media criticism and public skepticism had taught Camilla to mask her true feelings. But Elizabeth's trained eye could see through the carefully constructed facade to the hurt woman beneath. When Camilla rose to speak, she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had learned to bear disappointment with grace. Her speech began exactly as she had planned, with heartfelt tributes to the fallen and acknowledgement of their family's ongoing sacrifice. Her delivery was polished and sincere, reflecting years of experience in public speaking and genuine commitment to charitable causes. However, as Camilla reached the portion of her speech where she had intended to unveil her own support initiatives, she found herself in an impossible position. To proceed as planned would make her appear either unoriginal or competitive with Catherine, while abandoning her prepared remarks would leave her speech feeling incomplete and purposeless. The Queen held her breath as Camilla made a split-second decision that would define the rest of the day. Instead of presenting her own programs, Camilla chose to build upon Catherine's announced initiatives, graciously offering her support and suggesting areas where their efforts might complement each other. It was a masterful diplomatic response that prioritized unity over personal recognition, but the cost of this choice was evident to anyone watching closely. As Camilla spoke about collaboration and shared vision, her voice gradually grew more controlled, more distant, as if she were retreating behind emotional walls built from years of putting duty before personal fulfillment. The warmth that had characterized her earlier charitable work seemed to drain away, replaced by the careful professionalism of someone protecting themselves from further hurt. The audience, unaware of the underlying drama, received Camilla's speech warmly, appreciating her gracious support of Catherine's initiatives. Several military families approached both women afterward to express their gratitude for the royal family's continued commitment to their welfare. The public face of the event was an unqualified success. However, during the informal reception that followed, the Queen observed the growing chill between the two women with increasing concern. Catherine, still glowing from the positive response to her speech, attempted several times to engage Camilla in conversation about their shared projects. Each overture was met with polite but increasingly distant responses from Camilla, who seemed to be withdrawing further into herself with each passing moment. The breaking point came when a particularly enthusiastic charity coordinator approached both women simultaneously, gushing about Catherine's brilliant and original ideas for military family support. The coordinator's innocent praise, delivered in Camilla's presence, served as an unintended reminder of the morning's events and their personal cost. The Queen watched in horror as Camilla's carefully maintained composure finally began to crack. The woman who had endured decades of public scrutiny and family tension was reaching her breaking point, and Elizabeth realized that years of accumulated disappointments were about to overflow in a very public setting. As the crowd continued to mill around them, celebrating what they saw as a successful royal charity event, the Queen prepared herself for what she feared would be an irreparable family crisis unfolding in plain sight of the very people they were meant to serve. The reception hall buzzed with animated conversations as guests mingled, sharing stories about their loved ones and expressing enthusiasm for the new support initiatives. The Queen moved through the crowd with practiced ease, offering comfort to bereaved families and gratitude to charity workers, all while keeping a watchful eye on the increasingly tense situation developing between Catherine and Camilla. Catherine, still energized by the positive response to her speech, found herself surrounded by admirers and supporters. Military wives approached her with tears in their eyes, thanking her for understanding their struggles and offering hope for the future. Young soldiers shared stories of their own families, expressing relief that someone in her position truly grasped the challenges they faced when balancing service with parenthood. The genuine warmth of these interactions reminded everyone present why Catherine had become such a beloved figure within military communities. Her ability to listen without judgment, to ask meaningful questions, and to remember personal details from previous encounters had earned her a reputation as someone who truly cared, rather than simply performed royal duties. However, Catherine's natural empathy, which usually served her so well, seemed temporarily impaired when it came to recognizing Camilla's distress. Perhaps it was the adrenaline from her successful speech, or maybe the overwhelming positive feedback from the crowd, but she appeared oblivious to the emotional storm brewing just a few feet away. Camilla, meanwhile, stood near the memorial display, ostensibly studying the photographs of fallen soldiers but actually struggling to maintain her composure. Years of royal training had taught her to smile through personal pain, to prioritize public duty over private feelings, but the morning's events had pushed her beyond her usual limits of endurance. The Queen approached Camilla quietly, hoping to offer support without drawing attention to the situation. The family seem very moved by today's proceedings, Elizabeth said gently, providing an opening for Camilla to express her feelings if she chose to do so. Yes, ma'am, Camilla replied, her voice carefully neutral. The Princess of Wales has certainly made a strong impression. The formal title, rather than the more familiar Catherine, did not escape the Queen's notice, nor did the slight emphasis on strong impression that carried undertones of something less charitable. Before the Queen could respond, they were interrupted by Lady Morrison, the charity's patron, who bustled over with clipboard in hand and enthusiasm radiating from every gesture. Your Majesty, she addressed both royals with barely contained excitement. The response to today's announcements has been absolutely extraordinary. We've already received 3 calls from other organizations wanting to partner with the Princess of Wales on her military family initiative. The Queen felt her heart sink as she watched Camilla's face carefully freeze into a mask of polite interest. Lady Morrison, completely unaware of the undercurrents in the conversation, continued her enthusiastic report with devastating innocence. The housing program Catherine outlined is exactly what we've been needing for years, Lady Morrison gushed, and the counseling services she described will fill such a crucial gap. It's wonderful to see fresh ideas and new energy being brought to these important issues. Each word of praise for Catherine's fresh ideas and new energy landed like a small blow to Camilla's already wounded pride. The Queen watched helplessly as years of her daughter-in-law's dedicated charitable work seemed to disappear beneath the wave of excitement for Catherine's initiatives. I'm sure the Queen Consort has valuable insights to share as well, the Queen interjected diplomatically, hoping to redirect some attention to Camilla's contributions. She has been working extensively with military charities for many years. Lady Morrison turned to Camilla with polite but distracted attention, the kind reserved for someone expected to offer supportive commentary, rather than original ideas. Oh yes, of course. Your Majesty's experience will be invaluable in supporting the Princess's programs. The word supporting hung in the air like a verdict. After decades of trying to establish her own charitable identity, after years of careful work to move beyond her complicated past and earn respect for her contributions, Camilla found herself relegated once again to a supporting role in someone else's story. The Queen saw the exact moment when something fundamental shifted in Camilla's demeanor. The careful composure that had carried her through the morning finally began to crumble, replaced by a coldness that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep inside her soul. It was as if emotional winter had suddenly descended upon the warmth of the charity event. I believe I've contributed quite enough for one day, Camilla said quietly, her words delivered with such controlled precision that they carried more impact than any raised voice could have achieved. If you'll excuse me, I have other commitments that require my attention. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees as Camilla prepared to leave. Her withdrawal was not dramatic or attention-seeking, but rather the careful retreat of someone who had reached the absolute limit of their emotional endurance. Catherine, finally becoming aware that something was wrong, approached their small group with concern evident on her face. Camilla, is everything all right? You look rather pale. The Queen watched with growing dread as Camilla turned to face Catherine directly for the first time since the speeches had concluded. The look that passed between them contained years of accumulated tension, misunderstanding, and hurt feelings that had never been properly addressed. I'm perfectly fine, thank you, Camilla replied, her voice carrying the kind of icy politeness that was more cutting than any outright hostility. I simply think it's time for me to step back and allow the next generation to take the lead, as they so clearly wish to do. The words were delivered with surgical precision, each one chosen to convey hurt without crossing the line into open confrontation. Catherine's face showed immediate confusion and distress as she realized that something she had done or said had caused offense, though she couldn't identify exactly what. I don't understand, Catherine said, her voice betraying the first signs of emotional strain. Have I said something wrong? I thought we were working together on these initiatives. Queen felt the situation slipping beyond her control as she watched 2 women she loved dearly move toward what felt like an irreversible confrontation, neither fully understanding the other's perspective, both hurt by circumstances that had spiraled beyond anyone's intentions. The moment stretched between Catherine and Camilla like a taut wire ready to snap, while the Queen watched helplessly as decades of royal diplomatic training seemed inadequate to prevent the approaching emotional collision. Around them, the charity reception continued, guests blissfully unaware that they were witnessing the breakdown of one of the most important relationships within the modern royal family. "Working together?" Camilla repeated, her voice carrying a brittle edge that made the Queen's heart clench with worry. "I wasn't aware that working together involved one person announcing comprehensive programs without consulting the other, particularly when those programs overlap significantly with work that has been ongoing for months." Catherine's face went pale as the implications of Camilla's words began to sink in. Her hand moved instinctively to her throat, a gesture of vulnerability that revealed how deeply the accusation had affected her. "I had no idea you were working on similar projects," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody told me. I would never have what?" Camilla interrupted, her years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. "Never have assumed that your ideas were entirely original? Never have presented them as revolutionary concepts that no one had thought of before? Or never have accepted all that praise for bringing fresh energy to issues that some of us have been addressing quietly and thoroughly for years?" The Queen stepped forward, recognizing the danger of this conversation spiraling completely out of control in such a public setting. Several nearby guests had begun to notice the intensity of the exchange, their conversations growing quieter as they strained to overhear what was clearly becoming a significant disagreement. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private," the Queen suggested gently, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to diffusing family crises before they became public spectacles. But Camilla seemed beyond the reach of diplomatic intervention. Years of careful restraint, of always stepping back to allow others to shine, of accepting secondary roles in the name of family harmony, had finally reached their breaking point. The accumulated weight of every slight, every overlooked contribution, every moment of feeling like an outsider in her own family, came pouring out in a torrent of controlled fury. "Privacy seems to be a luxury I'm not afforded," Camilla replied, her gaze shifting between Catherine and the Queen. "Everything I do is scrutinized, compared, and found wanting. Every initiative I undertake is either ignored or overshadowed. I've spent years trying to earn my place in this family, trying to prove that I deserve the respect that others receive automatically." Catherine's eyes began to fill with tears as she realized the depth of pain behind Camilla's words. Her natural empathy, which had been temporarily clouded by the excitement of the day's events, now focused entirely on the woman standing before her with such raw vulnerability. "Camilla, please," Catherine said, reaching out her hand in a gesture of reconciliation. "I never meant to diminish your work or take credit for your ideas. I've always admired your dedication to charity work. You've been doing this so much longer than I have." But Camilla stepped back from Catherine's outstretched hand, the gesture feeling more like rejection than reconciliation in her current emotional state. "Admiration and respect are apparently not the same thing," she said, her voice growing steadier but somehow more devastating in its calm delivery. "Admiration allows you to appreciate someone from a distance. Respect requires you to consider their feelings and contributions before taking action." The Queen felt tears beginning to form in her own eyes as she watched the two women she had hoped would become allies, perhaps even friends, drive wedges deeper into their relationship with every exchange. This was her family, her legacy, and she was witnessing it fracture over misunderstandings that seemed both preventable and irreparable. Lady Morrison, finally sensing the tension that had developed in their small group, approached with obvious concern. "Is everything quite all right? You all seem rather serious suddenly." "Everything is perfectly fine," Camilla said, her royal training reasserting itself even in emotional crisis. "I was just explaining to the Princess of Wales that I believe she should take full credit for today's wonderful announcements. After all, she clearly has the vision and energy that these initiatives require." The words were delivered with such poisonous sweetness that their true meaning was unmistakable to everyone present. Catherine visibly flinched as if she had been physically struck, while the Queen closed her eyes briefly in recognition that this had moved beyond simple misunderstanding into something far more serious. "That's not what I want," Catherine said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I don't want to take anyone's place or overshadow anyone's work. I just want to help these families. That's all I've ever wanted." "Then perhaps," Camilla said, collecting her purse and preparing to leave, You should have asked what help was already being provided before assuming that none existed. The finality in Camilla's voice sent a chill through the small group. The Queen recognized this tone from previous family crises. It was the sound of someone who had made a decision to withdraw rather than continue fighting a battle they felt they could not win. "Where are you going?" Catherine asked, genuine panic creeping into her voice as she realized that Camilla was preparing to leave not just the conversation, but potentially the entire event. "I'm going home," Camilla replied simply. "I think I've contributed quite enough to today's proceedings. The spotlight clearly belongs to others, and I've learned that fighting for recognition only makes one appear desperate and small." As Camilla turned to leave, Catherine reached out again, this time managing to catch her sleeve. "Please don't go. We can work this out. We can find a way to combine our efforts to make both programs work together." Camilla looked down at Catherine's hand on her sleeve, then up into the younger woman's tear-filled eyes. For a moment, the Queen hoped that maternal instinct might overcome wounded pride, that the obvious distress of her daughter-in-law might soften Camilla's resolve. Instead, Camilla gently but firmly removed Catherine's hand from her sleeve. "Some things," she said quietly, "cannot be fixed with good intentions alone." The silence that followed Camilla's departure was deafening, despite the continued conversations of other guests around them. Catherine stood frozen in place, her hand still extended where it had been gently removed from Camilla's sleeve, her face reflecting the dawning realization of how badly she had mishandled the situation. The Queen moved closer to Catherine, recognizing the signs of someone struggling to maintain composure in public while dealing with private anguish. Years of experience had taught Elizabeth that sometimes the most devastating family wounds were inflicted not through malice, but through thoughtlessness and poor communication. "I didn't know," Catherine whispered, her voice so quiet that only the Queen could hear. "I swear on everything I hold dear I had no idea she was working on similar projects. How could I not have known? How could we have been so disconnected that something this important never came up in conversation?" The Queen's heart broke a little more as she recognized the genuine anguish in Catherine's voice. This was not the calculated regret of someone caught in wrongdoing, but the raw pain of someone discovering they had inadvertently hurt a person they cared about. "Family communication has always been one of our greatest challenges," the Queen said gently, placing a steadying hand on Catherine's arm. "We've all become so careful about stepping on each other's toes that sometimes we fail to coordinate our steps entirely." Lady Morrison, meanwhile, stood nearby with growing confusion, clearly sensing that something significant had occurred but unable to understand its nature or implications. Other guests had begun to notice Camilla's absence, asking casual questions about whether she was feeling well or had other commitments to attend. Catherine struggled to respond to these inquiries while fighting back tears that threatened to undermine her public composure. Each innocent question about Camilla's whereabouts felt like another reminder of her failure to be considerate of her stepmother-in-law's feelings and contributions. "I need to go after her," Catherine said suddenly, turning toward the exit where Camilla had disappeared minutes earlier. "I need to apologize properly to explain that I never meant to undermine her work." But the Queen gently caught Catherine's arm, recognizing that immediate pursuit might make the situation worse rather than better. "Sometimes," Elizabeth said with the wisdom of decades, "the kindest thing we can do for someone who is hurting is to give them space to process their emotions before we attempt reconciliation." "But she thinks I don't respect her," Catherine said, tears finally beginning to overflow despite her best efforts to contain them. "She thinks I deliberately ignored her contributions and took credit for her ideas. How can I let her believe that even for a moment longer?" The sight of Catherine's tears had begun to attract attention from nearby guests, several of whom approached with concerned expressions. The Queen realized they needed to manage this situation carefully to prevent it from becoming a public relations disaster that would overshadow the charitable purposes of the event. "We should perhaps move somewhere more private," the Queen suggested, guiding Catherine toward a quiet alcove where they could speak without observation. As they walked, Catherine continued to struggle with her emotions. "I keep thinking about all the times we've been together recently, all the conversations where I could have asked about her projects, all the opportunities I missed to coordinate our efforts. How could I have been so self-absorbed?" "You weren't self-absorbed," the Queen said firmly. You were passionate about helping military families just as she was. Sometimes good people working toward the same goals can inadvertently create conflict simply because they care so much about their cause. Once they reached the relative privacy of the alcove, Catherine allowed herself to cry more freely, the weight of the morning's events finally overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. "She's been nothing but kind to me since I joined this family," Catherine said between sobs. "She welcomed me when she didn't have to, supported me when I made mistakes, and I repaid that kindness by humiliating her in front of people she's been trying to impress for years." The Queen pulled out her own handkerchief and offered it to Catherine, remembering countless similar moments throughout her reign when family members had come to her seeking comfort after relationship disasters, both public and private. "Humiliation suggests intent," the Queen said carefully. "What happened today was a failure of communication, not a deliberate slight. Camilla knows this, even if her pride is too wounded right now to acknowledge it." "Does she?" Catherine asked, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I did exactly what everyone always accuses me of doing, stepping into situations and taking over without considering who might already be there." The Queen recognized this as a reference to the ongoing media narrative about Catherine's role within the royal family, the suggestions that her popularity sometimes overshadowed other family members' contributions. It was a sensitivity that the Queen had hoped would fade with time, but clearly still caused Catherine significant anxiety. "The media narrative about your role in this family bears little resemblance to reality," the Queen said with unusual directness. "You have never sought to diminish anyone else's contributions, and today's situation doesn't change that fact." Catherine wiped her eyes with the offered handkerchief, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "I need to fix this somehow. I need to find a way to make her understand that I value her work, that I never intended to compete with her." "Fix is perhaps the wrong word," the Queen said thoughtfully. "Relationships cannot always be fixed in the way that broken objects can be repaired. Sometimes they must be rebuilt from new foundations of understanding and respect." As they spoke, the Queen could hear the sounds of the reception winding down, guests beginning to make their farewells and express their gratitude for the day's events. The irony was not lost on her that what should have been a celebration of royal unity in support of military families had instead revealed deep fractures within their own family structure. "I should return to the guests," Catherine said, attempting to straighten her appearance and compose herself for public interaction. "They deserve to have their appreciation acknowledged properly, regardless of what's happened between Camilla and me." The Queen admired Catherine's sense of duty even in personal crisis, but she could see that the young woman was barely holding herself together. The combination of guilt, regret, and public responsibility was taking its toll on someone who had always tried to excel in her royal role. The drive back to Buckingham Palace was conducted in near silence, with Catherine staring out the window at the London streets while the Queen sat beside her, both women lost in their own thoughts about the day's events. The successful charity reception had become overshadowed by a family crisis that seemed to embody all the challenges of modern royal life. As their car pulled through the palace gates, the Queen made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of retreating to her private quarters as was her usual custom after public events, she asked Catherine to accompany her to the blue drawing room, where they could speak more freely about what had transpired. "I want to tell you something about Camilla that you may not know," the Queen began once they were seated in the elegant room that had witnessed countless family conversations over the decades. When she first joined this family, she was determined to prove that she could contribute meaningfully to our charitable work. She spent months researching military family support, visiting veterans' hospitals, and developing relationships with service organizations. Catherine listened intently, her face still bearing traces of the tears she had shed earlier. "I had no idea she had been working in this area for so long," she said quietly. "I thought my interest in military families was relatively unique within the family." "That's precisely the problem," the Queen said with a sad smile. "We've all become so cautious about our individual territories, so careful not to step on each other's projects that we've failed to communicate about our shared interests. The result is that family members end up working in isolation on causes they're passionate about, never realizing they could be collaborating." The Queen rose and walked to the window that overlooked the palace gardens, where spring flowers were beginning to bloom despite the emotional winter that seemed to have settled over their family relationships. Camilla has spent years trying to find her place within our charitable framework. Every initiative she's undertaken has been carefully chosen to complement, rather than compete with existing family projects. Today's overlap wasn't intentional on anyone's part, but it struck at her deepest insecurity. "What can I do?" Catherine asked, her voice heavy with regret. "How do I repair something this fundamental when I didn't even realize it was broken?" Before the Queen could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. Margaret, the lady-in-waiting, entered with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but the Queen Consort has asked me to deliver a message." The Queen's heart sank, fearing that Camilla was about to announce some dramatic decision that would make the situation even more difficult to resolve. "What message?" she asked carefully. "The Queen Consort wished to inform you that she will be withdrawing from all military charity work effective immediately," Margaret said, her discomfort with delivering such news evident in every word. She feels that her continued involvement would only create confusion and conflict, and she believes it would be best for all concerned if she focused her charitable efforts elsewhere. Catherine's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. "She can't do that," she said, rising from her chair with sudden urgency. "Those families depend on her support. She's built relationships with them over years. I won't be responsible for taking that away from them." The Queen felt a deep sadness settle over her as she recognized the full extent of the damage that had been done. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride anymore. It was about real consequences for the families they all claimed to serve. "Margaret," the Queen said quietly, "please tell the Queen Consort that I would very much like to speak with her this evening if she's willing." After Margaret left, Catherine began pacing the room with obvious agitation. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said, her voice rising with emotion. "I've driven her away from work that matters to her, work that helps people who genuinely need support. How is that serving anyone?" The Queen watched Catherine's distress with growing concern, recognizing that guilt and regret were threatening to overwhelm the young woman's usually steady judgment. "Catherine, you must not take full responsibility for a situation that involved failures on multiple levels," she said firmly. "But I was the one who gave that speech," Catherine replied, tears beginning to flow again. "I was the one who announced initiatives without checking whether someone else was already working in that area. I was the one who accepted all that praise for fresh ideas, while Camilla stood there knowing she'd been working on similar projects for months." The sight of Catherine's renewed tears triggered something deep within the Queen's maternal instincts. Despite her decades of royal training and emotional restraint, despite her reputation for stoic composure in the face of family crises, Elizabeth found herself overwhelmed by the tragedy of watching two women she loved hurt each other so profoundly through simple misunderstanding. "Oh, my dear child," the Queen said, her own voice beginning to crack with emotion as she moved to comfort Catherine. "This is what happens when good people try so hard to avoid conflict that they stop communicating altogether. We've all failed each other today." As the Queen embraced Catherine, feeling the young woman's shoulders shake with silent sobs, her own carefully maintained composure finally gave way. Tears that had been threatening all day began to flow freely down her cheeks as she confronted the reality of how her family's inability to communicate openly had created such unnecessary pain. "I should have created better systems for coordination," the Queen whispered, her voice thick with her own tears. "I should have insisted on regular family meetings about charitable initiatives. I should have noticed that you and Camilla were both working in the same area and brought you together before this happened." The two women stood together in the elegant drawing room, both crying for different reasons but united in their shared recognition of how badly the day had gone wrong. The Queen wept for the failure of family communication that had led to this crisis, while Catherine sobbed with guilt over her unintentional role in causing Camilla such pain. "She's been so kind to me," Catherine said between tears. "When I first married William, when I was terrified of making mistakes and disappointing people, she was one of the few family members who went out of her way to offer guidance and support. She never made me feel like an outsider, never made me feel like I had to compete for acceptance." The Queen nodded, remembering her own observations of Camilla's efforts to welcome Catherine into the family. "She saw something of herself in your situation," Elizabeth said softly. She remembered what it felt like to be the newcomer, to worry about fitting in and earning respect. "I think she wanted to spare you some of the difficulties she experienced. And I repaid that kindness by humiliating her in front of people whose respect she spent years trying to earn," Catherine said, her voice heavy with self-recrimination. "I made her feel exactly the way she was trying to help me avoid feeling." As their tears gradually subsided, both women seemed to come to the same realization simultaneously. This crisis, painful as it was, had revealed something important about their family dynamics that needed to be addressed regardless of whether they could repair the immediate damage. "We cannot let this end with Camilla withdrawing from work she's passionate about," the Queen said with renewed determination. "Those military families need her experience and dedication, and she needs the fulfillment that comes from making a real difference in people's lives." Catherine wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, her natural resilience beginning to reassert itself despite her emotional exhaustion. "Then we need to find a way to convince her that there's room for both of us in this work, that her contributions are valued and irreplaceable." The Queen looked at Catherine with a mixture of pride and hope, recognizing the strength of character that had made her such a valuable addition to the royal family. "Yes," she said simply. "We do." As the afternoon sun began to set through the drawing room windows, casting long shadows across the ornate carpet, both women understood that the day had marked a turning point in their family relationships. Whether that turning point led to greater understanding or deeper division would depend entirely on what happened next.